Hi there, my name is Viv, I'm from ANU Academic Skills, and today we're going to be talking about the representation task that you have for GEND1002. Now, in this course, you have a range of assessment pieces, and it's useful to think about how you're going to plan out your semester alongside any other courses that you're doing. So if you haven't yet, head along to our time management website. Download a copy of the time management materials, including the semester planner and some weekly routines, and have a think about how you're going to form a weekly routine and establish daily goals to help you study effectively. For the representation task, Roseanne is going to provide you an image, and you're going to need to write 500 words discussing whether the image is a representation. So one thing to keep in mind is that Roseanne really wants you to focus on the readings and the concepts that you've talked about in the course. So drawing on the relevant readings and concepts. So that's Hall, Mitchell, Webb, etc. And make sure that you use those ideas to argue whether or not you think that the image is a representation. Now, you will need to provide definitions of what you think those readings are saying about whether the image could be counted as a representation. So make sure that you spend the time identifying what is their definition of representation, what is their definition of how meaning is produced, and think about how do those concepts apply to the reading. You will need to use Harvard referencing, and in terms of the marking criteria, Roseanne is really wanting you to make sure that you answer the question directly. Give plenty of analysis to show how the ideas from the readings apply to the image. Choose a structure that's suitable and use Harvard referencing. So when breaking down the question and when brainstorming your ideas, keep going back to the question, is it a representation? Why or why not? Consult those course readings and think about the concepts. What's the definition of representation? What's the definition of how meaning is produced? Can you see how those apply to the image or not? Where are the stumbling blocks, for instance? And think about what those reasons are. To figure out how to structure it well, have a think about how your reasons and how your analysis can stand out within your structure. So some typical structures are the two that you see on the screen. Both of these are supposed to just represent an outline of the 500 words. So first of all, you might give a short introduction, just a few sentences, introducing your answer. And then you might start off by doing a paragraph about the definitions, grouping all those definitions together, and then providing in another paragraph or two the reasons for your answer, applying those definitions to the image. And finally, wrap up with a short concluding sentence or two to show whether you think the image is representation or not. And another structure that you could do is that if it's too hard to group all the definitions together, or if you find that it gets quite murky, if you find that it's actually easier to separate out the definitions and apply them with different reasoning to the image, then you could actually divide it up to give one main definition and application to the image, and then another reason for why, according to another definition, the image is or is not a representation. You could use even more ideas if you have them. It's up to you. So think about what ideas you have, what are the key points that you want to make that support your argument. And in both, keep it concise and keep thinking about each paragraph should be roughly 150 to 200 words. Keep them short. Also, make sure that you keep your argument consistent. One of the common traps that people fall into is having an inconsistent argument where the introduction states something like, they will argue that the image is not a representation, but then in the conclusion they say the opposite, that the image is actually a representation even though it did something that was unexpected. So you want to keep your argument consistent. When you've written the whole draft, go back and proofread it. Go back through and think about, is my argument the same all the way through? And avoid fence sitting. So if you want to make a bit of a complicated argument or an argument that has a couple of main points in it, make that consistent. Tell the reader what your whole argument is in your introduction as well as in your conclusion. So make it very, very clear from your introduction what your answer to the question is. Then, when you come to your paragraphs, think about how you explain and apply the ideas. So think about how you show your understanding of the readings and the concepts by explaining what those ideas mean. Now, somebody reading your work might have a completely different interpretation of what the sources say. They might have a completely different definition of what representation is. So, write as if the reader has not actually read the readings. A bad example of this would be if somebody, for instance, just threw together a whole bunch of quotes and didn't actually explain what they mean. And you can see that these quotes are just basically a list of quotes. So the author does not actually explain them. Whereas a better example would be to have a bit of explanation about what the ideas mean. So in here we have in blue, as Hall says, this means that for the image to be a representation, it needs to. So after giving the quotes, the author actually explains what those quotes mean in their own words. So that is really, really important. So think about explaining what the ideas mean in your own words. You could paraphrase them to save you more space as well. And make sure that when you're explaining how the ideas apply to the image, that you're very, very concise and very specific. So you would say something like, well, if Hall's definition is this, it means that the image needs to follow that definition by having these qualities. And the image does or does not do that because of these reasons. So you can see in the purple examples here that the author is actually applying the concepts or the definitions to the image. Another thing to think of is follow paragraphing conventions. Use a topic sentence for each paragraph. In your topic sentence, remember that it contains two main things: indicating the paragraph's main idea, which in this example are the definitions, and explaining that the paragraph is answering the question, explaining how the paragraph answers the question. So whether or not that definition shows that the image is or is not a representation. Another thing to do is to write as if your reader cannot see the image. Imagine that your reader sees something completely different when they're looking at the image. They're picking up on different cues, they're concentrating on different parts of it. So be specific about what you're referring to. Don't make the reader guess, and still be succinct, but be very, very clear. So in this bad example, for instance, you see that the author is talking about the image's colors, for instance, but we don't know which ones, or the shapes, but we don't know where those shapes are. So a better example would be where the author is very specific about which particular colors they mean and where the shapes are, what kind of shapes they are. So make sure that you write as if the reader does not see the same image as you do. Now, when you use Harvard referencing, remember that you have to reference in the text, so in the body of your assignment using the bracketed information, usually the author's surname, the year of publication, and the page number. And you provide a reference list at the end of the document. There's more information on our website about how to use Harvard referencing. As I said earlier, I'm going to be talking with you a little bit later in semester about your semiotic analysis, but remember that you can come and see Academic Skills for a range of advice. So if you have quick questions about your assignments, you can go and see the peer writers. And if you want to show somebody a piece of work where we actually read it in advance and then we meet and talk with you over Zoom, you can book in an appointment with the writing coaches. And if, for instance, you happen to be doing a longer assignment, say for instance you're doing one later on in your degree, you can come and see the learning advisors for things like PhD theses or honours theses, where we will read through chapters at a time and give you advice over the course of the year or years. So we're here to help in a range of ways. Now, another thing that you might be interested in is the English conversation groups. So we have conversation groups running for students whose English is their second or other language, and you're also welcome to volunteer if you have English as your first language. If you're interested in volunteering, get in touch with me. Now, we also have peer writing study sessions, where every Tuesday throughout semester, the peer writers will be talking about particular topics. So for instance, in week 1, it was time management. In week 2, it's reading and note-taking, and so on. They're going to be talking about all kinds of things: referencing, managing your sources within paragraphs, writing clearly and concisely, and so on. So they're going to be talking about a range of topics over semester where they're facilitated by later year students. So head along to the website to find out more. So finally, remember that when you're doing your representation task, make sure that you answer the question very directly. Choose the structure that suits your argument, and make sure that you explain and apply the ideas to the image. Be concise, be clear, use topic sentences, and make sure that you follow Harvard referencing and come and see us for more advice. All right, best of luck.